Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are going to be carrying on with our series of videos here, previewing each of the groups for the NBA's first in-season tournament. So, there are 6 groups of 5 teams each, so we've been sort of going through each of them in the last video. The first video, actually, we started out taking a look at the Eastern Conference's Group A. So if you want to take a look at that video, it'll be up on your screen right now, and I'll probably throw a link in the description of the video as well. So if you want to catch up, that video is available. But today, we are swinging things over to the Western Conference, looking at Group A in the West. So, before we get into the teams themselves, just a reminder of sort of the format here. We'll talk about the 5 teams, dividing them into roughly 3 categories. Those categories are favorites, contenders, and long shots. Those categories referring to the team's general likelihood to win the group, right? I know there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but that's the sort of vague definitions. So we'll divide the 5 teams amongst those 3 groups. After that, we'll talk about one team that I think is most likely to potentially move up a spot in those categories. And then, of course, one team that I feel is most likely to potentially fall down a spot. So, same format as the last video if you watched that one. But with that in mind, we will get into it. West Group A consists of the Phoenix Suns, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Utah Jazz, and the Portland Trailblazers. So, well, already you can kind of tell some of the storylines going down in this group, but we'll go through all of it anyway. In terms of our first section, in terms of favorites to win this group, it's a pretty clear duo up at the top. You've got the Phoenix Suns and the Los Angeles Lakers. So we'll start with Phoenix because they're a pretty clear choice here, right? They were already a strong team in the Western Conference. They were a playoff squad. Obviously, did not get as far as they wanted to, running into the absolute buzzsaw that was the Denver Nuggets, and maybe still is the Denver Nuggets because they didn't really change much. But the Suns were one of the top teams in the West. They were a playoff squad, and then they added Bradley Beal to that mix. They kept DeAndre Ayton, they added Beal, and they created a pretty terrifying super team. Now, we can't ignore everything here. There are some concerns for this team in terms of its depth, right? They cobbled together a free agent sort of market and filled out the rest of their roster outside of those main 4 guys. So we're not sure exactly what we're going to see from the Phoenix Suns bench just yet, but realistically speaking, all they have to do is hold the line, right? The second unit doesn't have to do anything crazy because that first star-studded starting lineup is going to do most of the heavy lifting. So, yes, there's concerns about their depth. Yes, there's some concerns maybe about their defense as well, but the just sheer unbelievable firepower that the Suns have at their disposal really does have to make them a favorite in this group. So, the Suns are a pretty clear choice. The Lakers honestly are as well, right? They struggled pretty heavily in the first half of the previous season. They had to rebuild their lineup at the trade deadline. But when they did so, they made a run all the way to the Western Conference Finals before, much like the Suns, running into the Denver Nuggets, who swept them out of that Western Conference Finals series. So the end wasn't great, but the rebuilding of that roster propelled them to pretty much the best second half in the league to actually make the playoffs. And this offseason, they did add a little bit more to that to bolster their lineup, right? They were able to add a couple more guys. Not sure if any of them are going to sort of crack the starting lineup for this team, but definitely a scenario where they get a little bit better in terms of their depth, in terms of maybe some of their outside shooting as well, a little bit of backup for Anthony Davis down low. So generally speaking, they were able to shore up some of their weaknesses, and they still have LeBron and AD at the helm. Now, LeBron is obviously continuing to get, older and older, but so long as he and Anthony Davis both remain healthy and neither one of them sort of goes down in the first couple of months of the season, I would expect the Lakers to be near or at the top of the standings for this group. So it's relatively self-explanatory here. For the Suns and the Lakers, if their star players stay healthy and contribute in the way that we've come to expect of them, both of those squads should be up at the top. But that does it for the favorites category. We move on to category number 2. That is the contenders, and we have only the one squad in this section for now, and that is the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, I know there's a lot of people who might be a little bit confused here because the Grizzlies, were a great team last season. They finished not quite at the top of the Western Conference, but a pretty close second place there. And normally the Grizzlies would be higher. Normally I would want to put them up in that favorite section. However, there is one little concern, and that concern is the fact that some of the group play games, or potentially all of them, actually, but some or all of the group play games here for the Memphis Grizzlies will coincide with Ja Morant's suspension. And he is going to miss the first 25 games of the season. So in the past, the Grizzlies were able to hold the line pretty well without Ja, but those were for sort of smaller stretches, not for 25 continuous games. So you're asking them to go a longer stretch of time without one of their better players, and that does introduce a little bit of uncertainty here. Now, the Grizzlies did make some good moves to sort of shore themselves up in Ja's absence, right? They made that trade for Marcus Smart to hold down that point guard role. They locked down Desmond Bane to a long-term extension. Steven Adams should hopefully be healthy for the start of the season, and obviously we're seeing Jaren Jackson Jr. Getting some work in over the offseason playing for Team USA in FIBA competition. So a lot of their pieces really do look like they're still going to be okay. It's just, will that be enough? Enough for the Grizzlies to stay competitive? I think so, even without Ja. But we're not quite sure that it'll be enough to keep up with teams like the Suns and the Lakers, so we do slightly fade the Grizzlies here, just a little bit because of the Ja suspension. But, it's going to be hard to tell until we actually see them playing without, obviously, their starting point guard. But that does it for the contenders section. We move now to the final spot, the long shots here in West Group A. And that is where we will find our final two teams. We've got the Utah Jazz in here alongside the Portland Trailblazers. So we'll start with the Jazz because they've got a lot to be positive about at this point, right? They just picked up John Collins in the offseason basically for free. It was Rudy Gay and a second-round pick, but that wasn't really a whole lot to pay for someone like John Collins. They held on to most of the rest of their talent, got guys either re-signed or opted in. So they're looking pretty good, right? They've got John Collins. Lauri Markkanen's coming off of winning the Most Improved Player award. Guys like Jordan Clarkson returned. They've got some young guys in there, right? Walker Kessler's heading into his second season. His rookie season certainly looked good. We saw some of their first and second year players in Summer League look relatively strong. I don't know that they're ready for NBA play yet, but at least they're coming along nicely in their first sort of preseason ramp up. But the fact is, all this comes together to make a scenario where the Jazz will almost certainly improve this season. I think Utah will be in a better spot at the end of this campaign than they were in the last one, which isn't saying too much because they were kind of near the bottom of the Western Conference standings last season. But this team should improve, but it's a similar scenario to what I was talking about with the Pacers in the previous video. I don't know if that improvement will come early enough in the season to affect the group play here, right? That is the thing to remember. These games for group play for the in-season tournament, they're happening in November, December on the timeline. So by the end of the season, will the Jazz be better? I am almost certain that they will be, but will they be good enough in November to have much of an impact in this group? That's where we would sort of find things questionable. So That is why the Jazz are sort of in this long shot section. I do believe they improve, just not sure if it'll be fast enough. But that brings us to the final team here, the Portland Trailblazers. And I mean, they're here for a very, very good reason, right? The Trailblazers are still attempting to trade Damian Lillard, but to be honest, the Blazers had difficulty competing even with Lillard. When he was playing for them for the past couple of seasons, they have been on the fringe of the playoff hunt, and obviously last season they were on the outside looking in. So at this point, in the aftermath of a Lillard trade, if it does happen, the Trailblazers may just be going into full-on rebuild mode, full-on sort of youth movement for them, focus on some of their young guys, right? Guys like Scoot Henderson, guys like Shaden Sharp, Anthony Simons. They're exciting players. They have a lot of potential, and I think one or all of those guys could be the future sort of faces of this franchise if they go in the right direction. But I don't think that they lead the team to the success they would need to make waves in this tournament in the first 2 to 3 months of the season. That is the thing to sort of remember here. We just talked about it with the Jazz. Your group play games will come in the first couple of months, and all of those guys are exciting that I mentioned, right? Scoot, Sharp, Simons. You've still got some veteran guys in there, guys like Nurkic, guys like Jeremy Grant, who will kind of know a little bit more of what they're doing, but is that mixture of young talent plus sort of older, more experienced players, assuming that Lillard is traded and that they don't bring him back, is that mixture enough for this team to take games off of the Grizzlies, the Lakers, the Suns in the first 2 months of the season? I would say no, pretty firmly. Of course, the opposite thing could happen, right? These young guys could come out just absolutely full of energy in the first couple of months, and they could run people out of the building based on just sort of pure energy and momentum alone. We have seen that happen with some of the younger teams, but it's rarer to see that happen than not, I would say. So, is it possible for the Trailblazers? Of course it is, but I wouldn't really expect it. So, that is all 5 teams put into their categories. So we'll recap that before we move on to most likely to exceed or disappoint. We've got the Phoenix Suns and the Los Angeles Lakers in the not the contenders, in the favorites category, excuse me. The Memphis Grizzlies are in the contenders section, and the Utah Jazz and the Portland Trailblazers are in our long shots category. So, with that being said, let's take a look at one squad I think is most likely to exceed expectations. That would be the Utah Jazz. I was just sort of talking them up a little bit, but we'll go down the list anyway. Going to be a little bit of a repeat, but it's worth mentioning. You know, Markkanen just won Most Improved Player. Jordan Clarkson and Talen Horton-Tucker were both retained. They could potentially become free agents, so the guard core for Utah will sort of remain relatively intact. They got John Collins for cheap. Walker Kessler was a first-team All-Rookie. Obviously, did not win Rookie of the Year because Paolo Banchero exists, but he made first-team All-Rookie. The Jazz added 2 guys in the top 16 of the draft who have some potential here, so everything's sort of coming up all right for them, right? Markkanen is starting to develop. They brought back a couple of guards. They added a big man. Their previous sort of rookie big man was good and is still developing, and they added more youth and talent in the draft. So every single sort of off-season box you would want to check was checked by the Jazz outside of maybe trading for some sort of superstar player, I guess. They didn't really do that, but that's not really what the Jazz's plan is at the moment. They are trying to build this team up as best as they can with the assets that they have available to them. And like I said, by the end of the season, the Jazz will be better than they were last season. I do genuinely believe that. I did mention also that I wasn't sure that their improvement would come quickly enough, but much like I said with the Trailblazers, it is a possibility. This team could come out early. They could sort of click in the offseason and the preseason, and instead of spending those first 2 to 3 months figuring it out, they come into the season already sort of having a good idea of how they're supposed to work, and maybe they do manage to take a few more games off of some of the other teams in this group, and find themselves in the mix, or at least not at the bottom, right? The whole point of this is a team that could maybe move up from the section that I originally put them in, and the Jazz were put all the way at the bottom. So I don't think it would take much in terms of their performance early for them to move from long shots into that sort of contenders section with the Memphis Grizzlies. So we shall have to see. But speaking of those Grizzlies, I do actually have them as the team most likely to underperform those expectations that I sort of put on them. And again, it really does just come down to the Ja Morant suspension here for the Grizzlies. His suspension will take most, if not all, of the team's group play games, right? So we have to ask questions at this point. Will Desmond Bane, on his shiny new max extension, will he produce enough to make up for Ja Morant and Dillon Brooks being gone? Will he be able to match that offensive production? Will Marcus Smart be able to contribute on offense while staying reliable on defense? Because that's kind of the reason they brought him in. Will Steven Adams be ready to go at 100% health-wise? Can Jaren Jackson Jr. continue to play at the incredibly high level that we saw from him previously, especially at the end of last season? The answer to all these questions will probably be yes, but they could be no. And if that's the case, if some of the answers to these questions are no, then the Grizzlies could pretty easily sort of stumble at the start of the season while they wait out the Ja Morant suspension. Is it something that I think is going to happen for sure? Probably not. I think the Grizzlies do at least stay afloat, tread water, and sit in a decent position while Ja is gone, but it would only take sort of one other domino falling here for them to maybe have to dig themselves out of a little bit of an early hole. So in that regard, I would label them as the most likely to sort of underperform based on where we had set those expectations. So again, it all just kind of revolves around the Ja Morant suspension, because he is going to be gone for over a quarter of their season. It's not really easy for any team to deal with, but that is that. We've got everything sorted here for Group A in the Western Conference. So, let me know what you think here. Who do you think was overvalued or maybe slept on a little bit? I did make some predictions for the Eastern group. I'll probably do the same here for the West. I'd say probably the Grizzlies would be the most contentious one I put there. There's probably some people who would want them a little bit higher in that favorite section. I'm sure there's also some people who have doubts about the Suns and the Lakers just because we haven't seen those new additions actually perform yet, so who knows how well it all works together. But whatever your opinion is, please feel free to share it. This is going to be, I think, one of the more interesting squads here in this in-season tournament, just because realistically speaking, everyone other than the Trailblazers comes into this with at least some hope that they could make this happen. Some of the other groups are a little bit less balanced, let's say, but this should be a good one. But again, feel free to let me know which teams you sort of have different opinions on. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.